Did you know that the body of King Richard III, the last king in the Plantagenet line, was not discovered until 2012? It was found under the Leicester City Council parking lot. It had gone missing for so long because he was buried without a grave marker. English history is filled with kings and queens who are famous worldwide. Still, while most people probably know about the modern royal family, or even the Tudor line, only a few know about the Plantagenets. While they weren't the first kings after the fall of the Anglo-Saxons, the Plantagenets were the first line of kings after the Norman conquest disrupted the course of English history. The time of the Plantagenets was violent and ruthless. The question of royal succession caused division in the family. It eventually led to one of the most complex civil wars in English history, the Wars of the Roses. The two sides of the family entered the war determined to win the right to the throne. The war ended with the Plantagenets' fall and the Tudors' rise. Although it might be easy to dismiss the Plantagenets as solely violent kings, they were essential to providing the structure England needed to move past the Norman conquest and become the country it is today. Who were the Plantagenets? The Plantagenets didn't even refer to themselves by that name. The moniker didn't come along until Richard of York adopted the name in the 15th century. Historians have since accepted the retroactive title, even though the family initially referred to themselves as the House of Anjou. They were named after their former founder, Geoffrey V. d'Anjou. Historians believe that he earned the nickname Plantagenet due to the yellow flowers he wore in his hat. They were called Plantagenets, and the name stuck. Geoffrey V. d'Anjou was a Norman. The Normans were related to the Vikings, but had settled in Normandy, France. In 1066, King Edward the Confessor died, and William the Conqueror invaded after the English people refused to give him the throne. He claimed that Edward had named him heir, so he led the Norman conquest. The Norman conquest caused unrest in England as the Normans overthrew the Anglo-Saxon rulers and installed their own nobility. William the Conqueror was crowned King of England on Christmas Day in 1066 after a fast invasion and decisive victory at the Battle of Hastings. But it would be years before England became stabilized through the forceful leadership of the Plantagenets. Geoffrey V. d'Anjou was the Duke of Normandy in the 12th century. He married into the English royal family in 1128, wedding Matilda, daughter of King Henry I. Although Henry had many illegitimate children, Matilda was King Henry's only surviving heir. Matilda didn't get to keep the crown. In 1135, her cousin Stephen of Blois took it by force. This insurrection led to a civil war between King Stephen and the combined forces of Matilda and Geoffrey V. d'Anjou. Eventually, Matilda and Geoffrey's son, Henry II, became King of England in 1154, officially starting the Plantagenet dynasty. The Plantagenets stabilized England after the Norman conquest. They started an English parliament and implemented local law and order. They also conquered Wales and fought and allied with Scotland. Great Britain is still working through the consequences of these events today. The Plantagenets are most famous for their involvement in the 100 Years' War, a war between England and France over a land dispute and other political reasons. Both countries believed they had the right to specific regions like Aquitaine, Normandy, and Anjou. Although the Plantagenets ruled England until 1485, they split into two houses in 1399 when John of Gaunt died. Both the House of Lancaster and York had strong claims to the throne, but the House of Lancaster maintained its power. Lancaster had the throne. York had critical political positions in the court and government. It seemed the balance would hold, but the family feud came to a head in the 15th century, launching England into the Wars of the Roses as the two sides of the Plantagenets battled for the English throne. How did the Wars of the Roses start? The Wars of the Roses had many causes, but one of the leading causes was the tension between the House of Lancaster and York. The tension came to a head under King Henry VI, the son of King Henry V. You might recognize King Henry V. He's famous for winning the Battle of Agincourt, and Shakespeare's play about him is still celebrated today. However, Henry V died shortly after the Battle of Agincourt in 1422, and Henry VI became king at 9 months of age. The Regency Council ran England, but the 100 Years' War remained controversial. By the time Henry VI turned 16 in 1437, the council was split between war and peace. and one of the people strongly in favor of continuing the war was Richard of York. King Henry VI wanted to end the war, so he married Margaret of Anjou in 1445. This wasn't enough to stop the war. The war continued in 1450 and ended with an English defeat, increasing the tension in England. Some of this tension arose because King Henry VI was not a strong king. Therefore, he was always in danger from usurpers wanting to take the throne. He also suffered from episodes of psychological instability several times throughout his life. The first significant episode struck after hearing the French forces had forced the last of the English troops out of France. The shock would have upset anyone, but Henry VI could not rule his kingdom for 2 years. Richard of York was named the Lord Protector of the realm to serve while the king was unwell. Margaret of Anjou was upset about this because she knew Richard had a stronger claim to the throne. Although her husband was a weak leader, Margaret was clever and ambitious enough to know that many of the people around her husband had ulterior motives. Richard intended to take the throne for himself, but Margaret gave birth to Prince Edward in 1453, and King Henry VI recovered by 1455. Richard of York no longer needed to serve as the Lord Protector of the realm. He didn't let this setback stop his ambition. Instead, Richard of York put together an army and attacked the king and company near St. Albans. He took the Lancastrian king captive and accidentally started one of the strangest wars in English history. Even though Richard of York had captured the king, he didn't want to kill him lest Henry's son inherit the throne. In fact, he didn't even hold King Henry VI captive for long. By 1456, Henry had reinstated Richard back into the army. In 1458, Henry VI called for a love day, a ceremonial ceasefire between the Lancasters and the Yorks. Although the meeting appeared to go well, Margaret of Anjou knew it was only an illusion. She took control and mustered up an army to meet the York forces at the Battle of Blore Heath in 1459. Richard of York was declared a traitor shortly afterward. By 1460, the rebel forces had taken London in the Battle of Northampton, and Richard thought he had won the war. He ensured King Henry VI was locked up in the Tower of London and then went straight to the palace. However, because Henry VI and his son were still alive, Parliament hesitated to name Richard of York king. In an effort to bring peace, they named him Lord Protector of England and agreed that Richard and his sons had the right of succession over Henry VI's son. This arrangement did not appear to upset King Henry VI. He was generally quiet in his imprisonment and appeared to have been comfortable and well cared for. However, Margaret of Anjou was furious and escaped London with her son Edward. Richard of York only had control of England for a few months before Margaret gathered another army. She made alliances with the Scots and Welsh to add troops to her army. Finally, she confronted Richard of York in the Battle of Wakefield. The battle only lasted an hour, but it was one of the biggest and bloodiest of the entire war. It ended with Richard of York's death, and even this was not the end of the Wars of the Roses, because Parliament had agreed that Richard's sons had the right of succession instead of Henry VI's son. The battle of the English throne continued. At this point, the Tudors joined the Wars of the Roses. Before, the main fighting had been between the houses of Lancaster and York, the two parts of the Plantagenet family. The Tudors were not related by blood to the Plantagenets. Owen Tudor was King Henry VI's stepfather, and Jasper Tudor was Henry's half-brother. They joined the Lancaster side to fight against the York army, but for several years, the fighting remained between the houses of York and Lancaster. Edward of York won the throne in 1461 after a particularly violent battle, and he defended it strongly, killing Henry VI's son in battle and ordering King Henry's death in 1471. It appeared that the Lancastrian line had ended, and the House of York had taken the throne. The war seemed to be over. If the House of York killed all the Lancastrians, how did the Tudors come to the throne? Although King Edward IV successfully removed all Lancastrian claimants to the throne, he neglected to ensure that his line of the House of York was safe from the rest of his family. Edward IV died of illness in 1483, leaving his 12-year-old son Edward as his heir. Because the boy was still underage, King Edward IV had appointed his brother, Richard, as the Lord Protector. However, Richard had other plans for his nephew. After King Edward IV died, Richard quickly locked Edward V and his younger brother Richard in the Tower of London. The elder Richard then convinced Parliament that Edward V and his brother were illegitimate by saying King Edward IV had been engaged to another woman before marrying Elizabeth Woodville, the boy's mother. On July 6, 1483, Richard III was crowned king, and the boys remained imprisoned in the Tower of London. No one knows how long the boys lived after Richard III was crowned king. They faded from the public eye. They attended no royal events and soon did not receive visitors. There was no funeral or news of their death, but by the end of 1483, most people assumed the boys were dead. Historians are unsure who killed the boys. Many people think it was Richard III, but there is no concrete evidence. The grave of the boys wasn't even known. Thomas More wrote about how their bodies were buried under a pile of stones within the Tower of London complex for years. Then, a priest reburied the two boys more appropriately, but he died shortly afterward. Since then, two small skeletons have been found, and many historians believe them to be the remains of the two boys. However, royal approval has not been granted for any forensic testing. After Richard III killed off the other York claimants to the throne, Richard III's first wife, Anne Neville, died in 1485. Richard decided to marry his niece, Elizabeth of York. He needed an heir. However, Elizabeth was the sister of the two lost princes, and her mother, Queen Elizabeth, did not want her daughter to marry Richard III. However, some sources say this was only rumored and that Richard sent Elizabeth of York away. Elizabeth joined forces with Queen Margaret Beaufort to support the one remaining man with a claim to the throne, Henry Tudor. Henry Tudor was the nephew of King Henry VI, and his father, Edmund Tudor, was Henry VI's half-brother. The Tudors were related to the House of Lancaster, even if they weren't Lancastrians themselves. Henry Tudor started his campaign for the throne in 1485. As he marched to London, he quickly gathered more supporters. Richard III marched out to defend his throne, and the two armies met at the Battle of Bosworth. The battle ended with the death of King Richard III. Historians believe he was killed by a Welsh nobleman named Rhys ap Thomas, and Henry Tudor immediately arranged a coronation to prevent other claimants to the throne. Instead of being crowned in London, Henry's coronation took place on a hill beneath an oak tree. The hill has been called Crown Hill ever since. His formal coronation did not occur until October 30, 1485, and King Henry VII was proclaimed the first non-Plantagenet king in 300 years. After ruling England for so long, the reign of the Plantagenets had officially ended. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Plantagenets, check out our book, The Wars of the Roses, a captivating guide to the English Civil Wars that brought down the Plantagenet dynasty and put the Tudors on the throne. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.